Hi guys, I just have a couple of things I want to say before I start the video. First, I didn't realize but I made a mistake in my previous true crime video thanks to a comment I received. A picture that I said was Hitoshi Ura was in fact Osamu Tanaka. I can't go back and edit it, but I put the timestamps in the description of that video in case you guys want to go back to it. Second, my channel has been getting crazy views on this one here about the fact that sometime in July, a megaquake is expected to hit which will be so massive that it will change the geography of Asia by literally uplifting the landmass and causing monstrous tsunamis. In fact, several earthquakes occurred around Kyushu toward the end of June and early July, and the news talked about this megaquake hitting on the 5th. Now, what you may not know is that Japan experiences over 2,000 earthquakes a year, so everything that's happened is merely just a natural occurrence and has nothing to do with Ryo Tatsuki's prophecy. People were definitely freaking out across Japan though, saying the 4th might be their last day on Earth, especially for those living in the south around Kyushu and here in Okinawa. In fact, I saw so many people out on the 4th watching the sunset. Again, this might have just been a coincidence because the sunset was ridiculously beautiful that day, but maybe some of them were thinking that it would be their last sunset ever. I actually went out with my girls and we were saying the same thing as we took a bunch of pictures. So, I just want to let you all know that we're safe and sound and life is continuing on as normal. Finally, in case you guys missed my post from earlier this week, I didn't have time to do all the editing for our creepy trip across Japan because I got inundated with work. I'm a freelancer, so it's really unpredictable and I couldn't find the time to do the edits for the video, which is very time consuming. Instead, I recorded some stories pertaining to stigmatized properties. It's in a podcast format, so turn off the lights, get cozy in your bed, and enjoy the next 3 stories. Alright, let's get started. I'm a 36-year-old male and a freelance journalist based in Tokyo. Most of my work focuses on human interest stories, obscure subcultures, and occasionally urban legends. The piece I'm about to share wasn't supposed to be anything more than a fluff article, a Halloween special, something digestible and forgettable. But it's been 6 months since I submitted it and I still can't sleep properly, and I think that's because I never actually wrote the full story. Until now. It started with an assignment from a mid-tier digital magazine I sometimes contribute to. The editor, Arai, messaged me online, which is like WhatsApp, but in Asia. He said, "We're doing a series on stigmatized properties. Can you investigate one? Real estate and ghosts. People eat that shit up." He sent a laughing emoji, but I could tell he was serious. Stigmatized properties, for those who don't know, are places where unnatural deaths occurred. Suicides, murders, solitary deaths where bodies went unnoticed for weeks. In Japan, landlords are legally required to disclose those kinds of histories to potential tenants, though only for a limited time. There are entire websites like Oshimateru that track these places, list the events, even show the rent, which is often suspiciously cheap. I picked a building in Itabashi Ward, northwest Tokyo. A second-floor unit in an old wooden apartment block. According to the site, a woman had hanged herself there in 2013. Her body wasn't discovered for 2 weeks. She'd been in her early 30s, unemployed, no next of kin. That was all the listing said. Rent was about 38,000 yen or $260 a month, about half the average for the area. I called the landlord and arranged a viewing. I didn't mention the suicide. When I arrived at the building, I realized just how worn down it was. Flaky white paint, a rusting staircase, vines growing unchecked along the railings. No intercom, just a cluster of mailboxes, all crammed with flyers and unopened envelopes. The landlord met me at the door. He was in his late 50s, wearing thick glasses, and had a face like an old rice cracker, brittle and tired. He didn't give me his name.
Room 203,
he said, unlocking the door.
You're the second person this year who's asked. Because of the price?
I asked. He looked at me like I already knew the answer.
It's quiet,
he said instead.
No complaints from the neighbors, but people don't stay.
Inside, the apartment was exactly what you'd expect for that price. 1 6-tatami mat room, a unit bath, a tiny kitchen. There was no furniture, no smell, no visible signs of trauma. The only odd thing was that one of the tatami mats in the back right corner was slightly darker than the rest.
This one mat,
I said.
It looks newer.
He nodded.
I replaced it. With what? Same material, same size, same color.
I looked at it again. There were no stains, but something about it felt off. The pattern of the weave was ever so slightly misaligned, subtle enough you might not notice unless you were staring.
People don't stay,
I repeated.
3 tenants since the incident,
he said.
First one left after 2 weeks, complained of headaches and strange dreams. The second said the air felt heavy, always cold even in summer. And the third? Didn't say anything, just stopped paying rent.
I asked him if he'd be willing to let me stay there for a few nights. He stared at me, then shrugged.
You're the one asking.
I moved in the next day with a sleeping bag, my laptop, a thermos, a notepad, and 2 cameras. 1 handheld, 1 motion activated. I told myself it would be a simple write-up. Stay 3 nights, document everything, maybe interview a few neighbors, add some spooky embellishments. Done. But something shifted the moment I stepped in with my bag. It wasn't just the silence. It was how the silence seemed to stretch, like it was pressing against the walls. I chalked it up to the old construction. Thin wood, poor insulation. Still, there was a density to the air, like being underwater. I set up the motion camera on a small tripod in the corner, aimed at the room. It had night vision and would start recording automatically with movement. I kept the handheld one by my futon, just in case. The first night, nothing happened. There were no sounds, no movements, just the faint hum of traffic far off. I woke up around 3:40 a.m. needing to pee. The room was freezing, even though it was late May. When I stepped onto the tatami, I felt it immediately. The one mat in the corner was colder than the rest. Not just cooler, cold. I checked the window. It was closed tightly and there was no draft coming through. Back in my futon, I noted it all in my journal.
Unnatural cold patch, far corner, possible insulation issue.
The second night, I heard breathing. It started around 2 a.m. and it was faint and raspy. At first I thought it was from the hallway, but when I opened the door, the corridor was empty. There was no wind blowing, no voices, no footsteps. I lay back down with my heart beating a little harder in my chest. Then I heard it again, and this time it was closer. The breathing didn't sound like it came from a person. It had a strange rhythm. Long inhale, short exhale. Like how you'd breathe if you were in pain. But it wasn't in the room. It was beneath it. I pressed my ear to the tatami. Nothing. When I checked the footage from the motion camera the next morning, the file had glitched. Static for almost 2 full hours. I reviewed the memory card on my laptop, but I got the same result. No usable video between 1:48 and 3:57 a.m. I emailed the editor.
Have some solid atmospheric notes. Might dig deeper into this one.
He replied,
Add a spooky detail or two and call it a day.
but something told me there was more here. I started looking into the old woman who had died, trying to find a name, a record, anything. The police wouldn't release her identity, and the landlord either didn't know or didn't want to say. So I did what any journalist would do. I decided to ask the neighbours. Out of the 5 units in the building, only 2 were occupied. One by an older man who refused to answer the door, and another by a woman in her 40s named Sugimoto. She was hesitant at first, but agreed to speak to me after I explained my work.
I've lived here 7 years,
She said.
I was home when the smell started.
Her voice was soft, her hands trembling slightly as she lit a cigarette.
No one had seen her for days. I thought maybe she went back to her hometown, but then it got worse. You know, the smell I mean.
I nodded.
The police came and they were in there for hours. I saw her being carried out by the stretcher and she was covered, but I saw part of her foot.
She looked away for a moment.
She used to be cheerful, you know. Always said good morning. But she got quieter, and I think she lost her job. The lights in her place started staying off. Then, nothing.
I asked if she'd experienced anything strange since then. She hesitated, then said,
Sometimes I hear footsteps, late at night in the hallway, but no one's there. Just the sound of someone walking. And once...
She stopped.
What? Once I heard crying from your room.
That night, I recorded audio in addition to video. I left my laptop running with the mic pointed toward the far corner. Nothing happened until exactly 3:13 a.m. Then, a creaking sound like weight shifting on wood. A soft thump, and then a woman's voice. Not speaking, just crying. It was muffled, low, and sounded heartbroken. The sound file gave me chills. I replayed it again and again, trying to isolate the voice. There was no other interference, no background noise, just the cry. I posted an anonymous question on a paranormal forum asking if anyone had ever experienced phantom crying in an old Japanese apartment. Most replies were jokes, but one caught my attention. It read,
If you hear crying near tatami, check beneath the floor. Some suicides leave more than just stains.
I didn't want to follow that advice, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So the next morning, I called a carpenter I knew from a previous article and asked if he'd help me check under the tatami. Told him I suspected mold or water damage. He came by the next day. The landlord had no objections. We lifted the mat and saw that the floorboard beneath was warped and discolored, and it was damp to the touch. We pried up the wood, and what we found was creepy as hell. Bundles of hair, black, long strands, and what looked like pieces of string or cloth. The carpenter recoiled. He muttered something about old spirits and quickly left, telling me not to contact him again. I took photos and bagged a sample of the hair in a Ziploc. I didn't sleep that night. I submitted my draft to the magazine, but I excluded the hair. They published it a week later, dressed up with ghost emojis and SEO headlines.
Tokyo's cheapest apartment has a chilling past.
It went semi-viral, but again, most of the comments were jokes.
You just described my current apartment, LOL. Ghost girl? Sign me up if the rent's under 40,000 yen.
But one comment stood out. There was no username and no icon. It read,
That room was mine.
I replied to it straight away but got no answer. About 2 weeks later, I started getting texts from an unknown number. They began harmlessly enough.
Are you still in room 203? Do you hear her too?
I asked who it was, but got no reply. Then came the photos. Blurry shots from inside the room. One showed me asleep in my futon. Another was a close-up of the dark tatami mat taken from a high angle, like from the ceiling. I contacted the police. They checked the building, but there was no evidence of forced entry or fingerprints. They told me to change the locks and get some rest. That night, I dreamt of the room. Except in the dream, I wasn't alone. I was lying on the futon, unable to move. The air was heavy and the lights flickered, and in the corner where the dark mat was, something began to rise from beneath it. It was a woman. She had pale skin and her black hair was plastered to her face. She was wearing a frayed white blouse. She didn't speak. She just stared. I woke up gasping for air. I moved out the next morning, left the cameras, the futon, even my other pairs of shoes, and I haven't gone back. But I still get the messages, every month around the date of her death. Always the same words.
You saw me. Now you remember.
Was it real? I don't know. I reviewed the audio again last week. The crying was still there, and the sample of hair I collected, I sent it anonymously to a lab under a pseudonym, and they called the number I gave them. They told me the strands belonged to a woman in her 30s, long dead, and it was decomposed at the root. The report included one chilling note.
The hair appears to have been cut post-mortem.
Some say spirits linger where memories rot. Some say the dead want only to be seen, to be heard. But I think some want more. They want witnesses. I was one. And now that you've read this story, so are you. I'm a female and I've been a freelance reporter for 12 years, mostly covering social welfare, housing, and Japan's ever-growing loneliness crisis. I've interviewed hoarders, hikikomori, elderly people living alone in collapsing old apartment buildings, and entire families displaced by economic collapse. But this story, this one, has followed me like a shadow. It wasn't supposed to be about death, and it definitely wasn't supposed to be about what came after. It began with a tip from an old source at Osaka City Hall.
There's a unit in Sakai City. You should look into it. No one wants to live there. Not even the cleaning staff wanted to go in. They had to pay someone extra to scrub it down after the bodies were found.
I was writing a series on kodokushi, or solitary death, and how Japan's aging infrastructure and social detachment allow corpses to go unnoticed for weeks. This sounded like another grim entry for that file, so I booked a cheap hotel in Sakai, packed my recorder and notepad, and took the Nankai line down from Number Station. The building was in one of those old apartment complexes, concrete housing blocks built in the 60s and 70s to handle the post-war population boom. Most were still structurally sound, but looked like they'd been forgotten by time. Flaking paint, rusted rails, identical windows with identical laundry poles. This one was no different. It was 12 stories high with faded blue trim, and it was built in 1968. The unit in question was 408, a corner room. My contact said 3 bodies had been found there 2 years ago. A mother, father, and teenage son, all decomposed, doors locked from the inside and no sign of foul play. The official report called it a triple kodokushi, but that didn't make sense. Families don't usually die alone in the same apartment separately, unnoticed. I wanted to see the place for myself. I didn't think the landlord would talk to me, but he surprised me. He was a short, balding man in his 60s named Kubo. He wore a tight grey suit and smoked menthols.
You're writing about Kodokushi?
He asked, squinting.
People love that crap. Sad, but safe. You're not the first.
I asked if he was renting out 408 again. He sighed and rubbed his temples.
We've tried. I even offered a 4-year free. No one stays.
I asked if I could see it, and I expected a flat no. Instead, he handed me a key.
I'm not going with you,
he said.
But you can have a look. Just don't stay past sunset.
I smiled at him, but he didn't smile back.
I'm serious.
And he walked off. Room 408 was at the end of a concrete walkway on the 4th floor. The shutters were drawn tight. They'd been locked from the inside like storm shutters. Most of the other units had theirs open to let the breeze through. This one looked sealed. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the heat. It felt trapped, like the air hadn't moved in years. Dust floated in beams of grey light sneaking around the shutter edges. It was a typical 3-dining kitchen layout. A narrow kitchen, a small bath, and 3 tatami rooms. Nothing was left inside. There were just empty spaces and worn wooden floors. But in the air, there was something else. It wasn't a smell. Not exactly. It was more like a kind of pressure. I walked through the rooms one by one. The largest one at the back with a low built-in closet and sealed windows. It was in that room I noticed something strange. One corner of the tatami was warped, slightly lifted, like something underneath had pushed it upward. I crouched down and pressed on it, but it was solid, and when I leaned in, I felt colder. I made a note.
Back left tatami warped. Cold draft, no visible vent.
And then I heard it. A shh sound. It sounded like paper sliding across the floor. I turned around and one of the fusuma doors, the sliding ones between tatami rooms, was open just a crack. I could have sworn it was shut when I came in. I stood up and closed it. Then I left. Told myself it was just air pressure. Old buildings shift and it's completely normal. But something didn't sit right. Back at my hotel, I reviewed the photos I took. In 2 of them, taken back to back, the fusuma was slightly open in the second shot. I checked the metadata. Timestamps were 5 seconds apart. The next morning, I returned to the building with an idea. I wanted to talk to the neighbors. Only 2 units on the 4th floor were still occupied. The first tenant, a woman in her 80s, refused to open the door. She said nothing, just stared through the peephole until I left. The second was a man in his 70s named Nishida. He was reluctant at first, but opened up after I mentioned the old family.
They were quiet,
he said.
Kept to themselves, never caused trouble.
He paused.
But the boy, he used to come to my place sometimes, borrow tools, said the shutters wouldn't open.
I asked what he meant.
You know, the storm shutters on the back windows. They're supposed to slide up, but his wouldn't. Said they jammed years ago.
I told him they were still shut. Nishida nodded.
That's not the weird part.
He leaned slightly and said,
One night, he told me he heard knocking from inside the shutters, like someone was trapped between them and the glass.
I looked into the family. Their surname was Arimura. Father, Shinsuke, aged 48. Mother, Noriko, 46. Son, Keisuke, 16. According to the medical report I pulled from an old police contact, all 3 died within 2 days of each other. Malnutrition, dehydration, no signs of violence or overdose. It just didn't make sense. The fridge had been fully stocked, there was food, water, gas, electricity, and none of them suffered from medical conditions. The father had apparently died first, then the son, then the mother. I visited the apartment again the next day. This time, I brought a temperature sensor and an EMF detector I'd used in previous ghost hunting stories. Mostly gimmicks for content, but they had the occasional use. As I stepped into the back room, the temperature dropped by 6 degrees. No aircon, no wind, and the EMF spiked near the tatami corner. Then it flatlined. That's when the knocking began. It was slow and deliberate. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Not from the front door, not from the hallway either, but from inside the room. I turned and saw that the one shutter, the one sealed tight, was rattling slightly, as if someone was trying to push it open from the outside. I ran. That night, I stayed up reading old reports about posthumous hauntings. Many of them centered on families, shared delusions, and mass psychosis, but something about this didn't fit those patterns. I posted anonymously on a local forum asking if anyone had lived in room 408. Only one reply came in.
The boy tried to leave. The shutters wouldn't let him.
I returned once more the next morning, determined to document the entire place. I brought a small night vision camera and set it up in the corner facing the shuttered window. I left it running for 12 hours. When I returned to collect it, the room smelt faintly of incense, but I hadn't burned any. And when I started to watch the footage, it showed something I can't explain. At 2:37 p.m., the shutter rattled, hard, for 6 minutes. The light in the room dimmed slightly like a cloud passed over, though it was a sunny day. And then shadows began to move across the walls. No people, no shapes, just shifting black patches like oil in water. Then the closet door opened, slowly. Nothing came out, but the camera glitched briefly, and when the image returned, the shutter was still and the shadows were gone. I went back to see Kubo, the landlord, and asked if there was any history with the unit before the Arimuras lived there. He frowned.
They weren't the first.
He opened a file drawer and pulled out an old yellow folder.
A man back in the 80s. He lived alone and he was paranoid, so he boarded up the shutters from the inside. Said they were watching him from behind the glass. He died there? Starved. Door was locked.
I asked why he still kept renting the unit. He looked at me with empty eyes and said,
Well, simple. Because someone always asks.
I tried to leave the story behind. I wrote a sanitized version for the magazine. I focused on kodokushi, the economic despair, the loneliness epidemic, but I never mentioned the knocking, or the shutters, or the cold breath I felt on my neck that last day as I packed up my camera. 2 months later, I got a message. It was from a young woman who'd read the article and moved into the complex looking for cheap rent. She said she was offered 408 for half price, so she took it. Her message was short.
They knock every night, and I've started knocking back.
I've spent the last few years interviewing people who live on the edge of Japanese society. The hikikomori, the chronically unemployed, those renting rooms barely bigger than coffins. I work as a documentary journalist, mostly for streaming projects or print features that vanish into the void after a week. But this story, the one I could never quite finish, has stuck with me. The footage is gone now, but I still have the notebook and the name. I still have what happened to Kenji. We first met in 2022. He was 28, skinny, with unwashed hair and a distant look in his eyes. He lived in Yokohama and worked part-time cleaning pachinko machines overnight. I was interviewing him for a piece on Japan's hidden tenants, people who lived in sublet units or illegal apartments, often unregistered or technically condemned. It's more common than you'd think. Landlords looking to make quiet money on the side, no contracts and no questions asked. We met at a family restaurant. He told me he was paying 15,000 yen or $100 a month for a single room in a building slated for demolition. There was no address and there was no postal service. He paid in cash to an older man who collected rent at a 7-Eleven near Shin Sugita Station.
What's the building like?
I asked. He blinked slowly.
Old, fallen apart, but quiet.
Then he hesitated.
They say someone died in my room.
I asked if I could see it. He didn't want to at first, but curiosity, or maybe loneliness, got the better of him. We arranged to meet the next evening at the train station. I brought my audio recorder, notebook, and a small video camera. The building was tucked behind a shuttered supermarket and a closed-down bar. A narrow alley led to a squat 3-story concrete structure half covered in ivy. There were no lights, no nameplates, and no mailboxes. Kenji led me up a creaking staircase to the second floor. We passed 2 doors with broken locks. One had "Dete," or "Get out," scrawled on it in red paint. He stopped at the last door, room 2B. The hallway light flickered as he unlocked it. Inside, the room was smaller than I imagined. A single window facing a wall. Tatami flooring rotting at the edges. A sink in the corner. No toilet. He said tenants shared one on the first floor. There was no electricity, and he used a portable charger for his phone and lit candles at night. The air was thick. There was a futon, a shelf, and a plastic crate filled with manga. And in the center of the room was a wooden board about the size of a tatami mat.
What's this?
I asked.
It was here when I moved in,
he said.
I think it covers the stain.
He didn't elaborate. I asked about the death. He shrugged.
Some girl, years ago.
Then, after a pause,
they said she stayed even after.
That night, I recorded an interview with him. Most of it was the kind of material I expected. Loneliness, poverty, how Japan forgets its people. But at the end, I asked,
Have you ever seen her?
Kenji was quiet for a long time. Then he said,
Not with my eyes.
Back in Tokyo, I looked into the building. Nothing came up. It didn't appear on Google Maps. The address block didn't list it in the Yokohama property registry. It was like it didn't exist. I checked demolition permits. One had been filed in 2011 for that entire street, but the name of the building was listed as unidentified secondary structure. And there was a demolition order with no date. It had been pending for over a decade. A week later, I messaged Kenji again, but got no reply, so a day after that, I went back. The alley was blocked off with construction tape. The building looked the same, but something was off. Like the angle of the structure had shifted ever so slightly, almost like it was leaning towards me. No one answered when I knocked. Then I saw something taped to the door of room 2B. A Polaroid photo, weather-worn and faded, but still visible. It showed a futon, but it was empty, and next to it a hand, just the fingers, reaching out from beneath the floorboard. I took the photo and left. The next day, I called the local ward office. I said I was trying to locate someone named Kenji Yamada. They checked their files and I was told there was no one by that name registered in that area. I asked about the building and I was told that there was no residential structure at that address. It was condemned years ago. So finally, I tried the number Keiji had given me. It was disconnected. 3 days later, I received a USB stick in the mail. There was no return address, and inside were 6 video files. I watched them all. Each was around 30 seconds long, grainy and dim, all recorded inside room 2B. The camera sat on a shelf facing the futon. Nothing happened for most of them, just flickering candlelight. But in the 5th file, the candle blew out and the screen went black. Then a face appeared, just for a moment. It was pale and had no eyes. Its mouth was open like it was screaming. There was no sound, and then the file ended. The final video was different. The camera had been moved. It was on the floor, angled upward. I could see Kenji sitting in the corner, knees drawn up, eyes wide. He was whispering over and over.
"It's under the floor. It's under the floor. It's under."
He stopped, turned, looked at the camera. Then, silence. His mouth moved. No sound came out. And then the video cut to static. I tried to go back one more time, but the alley was gone. I don't mean it was blocked. I mean, it literally wasn't there. The supermarket was still there. The closed-down bar was still shut. But between them was a solid concrete wall. I walked up and down the block, checked my notes, my GPS. Nothing made sense. No alley, no stairs, no room 2B, and no Kenji. I filed the story, or at least a version of it, for a print magazine. I removed the videos, downplayed the ending, and I said Kenji left the city and that the building was demolished. But I know that's not true, because last month I received another envelope. Inside was a note written in block letters.
"Room 2B still available. 15,000 yen a month. No questions. Meet at 7-Eleven behind Shin Sugita Station. Ask for the floor girl."
And beneath that was a Polaroid. It was new, and it was a photo of a candle-lit room. There was an empty futon on the floor, and a section of it was boarded up. And on the bottom of the photo was a handwritten message saying,
"She doesn't want to be forgotten."
All right, that's it for this week, guys. I want to try to pump out at least 2 videos a month because I've only been averaging 1 every 3 weeks or so. I'm going to do more of these podcast-like formats because they're quick to do, and that way I can give you guys more stories. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great week ahead and see you back in the next one. Cheers.